Hello, everyone, and welcome to an XTIVIA webinar, delivering the information you need for the business future you want. We're sharing our knowledge to help your business thrive in today's new normal. My name is Alex Killian, and I'm the video producer here on XTIVIA's marketing team. Before we dive into our webinar this morning, I'd love to tell you just a little bit about XTIVIA. For nearly 3 decades, we've been providing a variety of expert IT services to hundreds of businesses in countless industries. If you can imagine the business outcome, XTIVIA can create it with technology. And today we'll be hearing from some of our Microsoft experts. And this is the first in a series of Microsoft webinars. Joining us today is Karen Crowell. Karen is an account manager at XTIVIA. She enjoys helping companies thrive and accomplish their goals by delivering the Microsoft solutions they need and resolving bottlenecks and issues to customize a more efficient process for a better business. Karen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about our upcoming webinars in this series?
Yes, thanks, Alex. So today we're doing Azure. We're talking about Azure, which is really exciting. And next week, we're going to be going over GovCon side a little bit. GovCon is our DCAA compliant Dynamics 365 solution for government contractors who are working with financing, project accounting, payroll, etc. And then later in the webinar, we'll go over reporting, Dynamics 365 more for the private sector, SharePoint, and then licensing, which is always an adventure with Microsoft.
Awesome. Sounds like lots of exciting things coming up. So while this webinar focuses primarily on Azure, as Karen mentioned, XTIVIA does a lot. So Karen, can you tell our audience a little bit more about what XTIVIA does in this Microsoft space?
Absolutely. So what I love about being a Gold Microsoft partner is that we have the opportunity to tailor solutions to the customer's needs. And if you want to implement reporting, for example, we get to talk to you about your initiatives there and start with the goal in mind, and then recommend what we've seen for best practices without pushing something that doesn't make sense for your business. So let's say you're looking to share the reports that you've created. We might go over the benefits and the drawbacks of using on-prem Power BI versus Power BI embedded as a resource in Azure. And this is for all the Microsoft initiatives that your company might have, from user licensing, which we already talked about, could be something else with Microsoft sometimes, to bigger shifts like customizing ERP for your business.
All right, excellent. Next up, to start off our Azure panel, I'd like to introduce our senior Azure engineer, Frank Leonetti. Frank is a 10-year systems engineer with a focus on Microsoft products and services. Frank has several MCSEs such as Exchange, Azure Infrastructure, MCSA in Office 365 SaaS services, and server infrastructure. He's also a military war vet. Frank, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about the benefits of Azure?
Good morning, and we appreciate everybody being here today that's live, and we welcome everybody that might be watching the recording today. So yeah, let's talk about Azure. What are the advantages? Why are we here today? So first and foremost, let's talk about security. With Azure, you have Azure ARM, which is resource management, multi-factor authentication, key vault, and password management. Microsoft has made it seamless with integrations between Office 365 and Azure with security. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about Azure. Disaster recovery, we don't like talking about it, but we need to talk about it. One of the things that we need in our enterprise and small business environments is data recovery services. Azure makes it seamless and reliable in the Azure space. Compliance, over 90 compliance certifications in over 50 specific global regions and countries. Microsoft has come a long way with compliances from HIPAA all the way up to FedRAMP. So keep that in mind next time you're thinking about Azure. Flexibility, scalability. This kind of intertwines with costs, right? So scalability and flexibility of your cost estimates and what you're doing in your infrastructure. You could scale all the way up or you can scale all the way back. You don't have to worry about buying hardware every time you need to do something with a project, or if you need to build out your infrastructure. Azure scales it up and scales it down on the fly for you. Hybrid. You can integrate with your on-prem environment. If you're kind of leery about moving to Azure right away and you want to slowly have the process take off, Azure Hybrid Management is there, as well as Azure Arc. Azure Arc services are there for you as well to help secure your on-prem environment in the Azure space. Pricing, you have options within the Azure space. You can either pay as you go, there's no upfront cost, or you can do reserved instances. Reserved instances is something we can definitely get into in a later time, but reserved instances is pretty much where you have Azure resources available to you virtual, and you pay an annual contract for. Easy migration. Azure has teamed up with other third-party vendors to make things smoother in the transition, or you can just use their free Azure Migrate. They work with hypervisors such as Hyper-V and VMware, and also they just added about 6 months ago actual physical server compatibility. It's awesome. They just keep on innovating. I love it. Again, cost. You know, talk about OS licensing. We talk about user CALs, hardware. Azure takes care of that for you. They have everything integrated, or you can bring your own licensing with Azure Software Assurance. Microsoft Software Assurance. And then again, integrations. It works seamlessly with their SaaS Office 365 services and their PaaS Azure Services integration. So that's the advantages of Azure. Back to you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks for that info, Frank. And with that, we're going to move into our demo section of the webinar. Frank, would you like to introduce this demo and tell us a little bit about what we're about to see here?
Absolutely. So what we're going to be covering in this demo is going to be Azure Active Directory Domain Services. This is actually going to be encompassed of an entire web series that we're doing known as Azure VDI, which is virtual desktop instances. So what you're going to learn today is actually how to save some money. We're going to build out a serverless domain environment and that you can control, and we're going to show you that today. Alex? All
right, excellent. And also during this demo, if you have any questions come up, please feel free to submit those in the Q&A section. We're going to have a short Q&A after the demo and hopefully answer any questions you guys have.
All right. So as you can see, we've logged into our portal.azure.com and we're here at our home screen. So if you've never set up Azure Active Directory Domain Services before, or anything for that matter in Azure, and you just don't know where to go, I always suggest everybody start off with the search bar. So we're going to type in just domain services. And as you can see, as soon as I just type in domain, we have it here. So we're going to click on Azure AD Domain Services. And we have no services set up. So we're going to go ahead and either add here, or we can go ahead and right here, create Azure AD Domain Services. We're going to click add. So just keep in mind that you only have one Azure ADDS service per subscription. So if you want to have multiple domain services set up for your environment, you can have one tenant, but you would have to set up different subscriptions for the Azure domain services. So we're going to use a subscription today. Resource group, I always suggest you create your resource groups prior to actually setting up any services. That way you just know where you're storing your stuff and they go accordingly to what makes sense for your environment. Everybody's going to be different. In this case, I have where it's just my lab, it's in the east, and it's, as you can see, Azure Active Directory Domain Services. So we're going to select that. If you didn't have one set up, you could just hit create new, select the name, sorry, not select, actually create the name yourself and hit OK and create it right there. DNS domain name, this is where you set up your domain name, just like you would in your actual environment, setting up the domain role for a domain controller. We're going to use ours, virtual-dba.com. Shameless plug, check it out. That's where we have our stuff. As I said before, that's where I have our blogs. We also have a lot of different other services. We'd love you all check that out. Region, you got to make sure that if you're going to set up Azure instance services within the East or any other region, you got to make sure that it lines up. You can't set up Azure domain services within the East and then try to set up your domain in the West. It just doesn't work that way. SKUs. SKUs are going to determine your pricing. I definitely suggest you check out their pricing at the links that we'll share after this module here, this tutorial about pricing. Pricing is subject to change. For now, we're going to use standard because we're not creating a large environment. We only have one forest, and we only want to pay $11 a month because this is about cost savings. But definitely suggest you check out the links that I share at the end of this. The forest type, we're going to create a user. Resource preview, we're not going to get into that today. We're just going to create a user forest just like we're used to. Networking. So in order to set up Azure Active Directory Domain Services, just like you would in your on-prem environment, it needs a network to connect to, a DNS service to connect to, all that good stuff. So I always let Azure Domain Services create its own VNet. You could definitely set up your VNet that's already existing if you wanted to, but just keep in mind, once that VNet's set up and you need to set up services within the domain services, you connect them to this VNet. So we're going to allow it to create a new one. It's going to be self-explanatory. It's going to create the VNet and a subnet already. So if you need a bigger subnet, if you need a bigger VNet, as you can see, this is creating a very small 256 subnet for IPs. If you need something bigger, definitely set it up prior to, and then come in here and select it yourself. So administration, who's going to manage the services. In order to set up the virtual desktop instances, one of the things we are going to have to make sure of is that we have our users that we're going to have as domain join users in here. As you can see, we have 2 users already set up for future. I kind of make things self-explanatory. This is going to be domain users, what we're going to use to join the services to the domain once we have it created. So just keep in mind, you'll always be able to come back to this. This is a group membership, so no big deal there. Who's going to get the warnings of critical alerts? This does have health checks. So if you have people within your Azure Active Directory that need to have access, you can either add them to the global administrators, or you can make them members of the Azure Active Directory DC group, as you saw, or you can actually add outside sources. So if you have an IT support group that needs access to alerts and things of that nature, if there's a distro group, things like that. Synchronization. So synchronization types you have where you can either have all of your directories synced or scoped. I have not seen a situation where you would want to do scoped right off the bat anyway. Just keep in mind, no matter which way you go, as you can see here, if you modify, you have to start over. So I definitely suggest you just keep it at all. Again, if you have a situation that may come up where you specifically need to scope it out for security reasons, I would assume, then go ahead and click scope. But just remember, if you do that, you would have to blow it away and start over if you need to change it. So the next step is going to validate what we've done. And if it's good to go, it's going to allow us to create. So as you can see, it's going to recap what we've done, our domain name, what subscription, the resource, all the good stuff, the SKU, forest type. We're going to hit create. So one thing I love about Microsoft and what they've done with the Azure services is they try to keep everything as informative as possible, just to let you know, hey, anytime any major changes are going to happen, we want you to know. So here's one of them. So as you can see, it says you should know. The following choices are final and won't be able to be changed after creation. Doesn't mean that once you do it, you're never going to be able to do anything. Like I said, you can blow it away. But it's just letting you know, hey, once this is done, this is static, you can't go in and change it. So DNS name, subscription, where it's going, resource group, virtual network, subnet, synchronization, and the forest type. So none of these can be changed. All of them are static. We're aware of that. So let's go. So that is the start of our deployment. As you can see, it's going to bring us to our log page. We're going to let it do its thing. And with the magic of media, we're going to come back and it's going to be done. So now that we have our domain services set up, the next thing that we want to do is we want to get the self-password reset set up. And this is important because we need to cover under Azure Domain Services. One of the things that we're going to do is we have to, for cloud-only user accounts, we need to create password hash synchronization. So we already have users set up, which means that in order for the passwords to be stored in the domain services vault that you won't have access to, but it's just there, you have to trust Microsoft, is the hash that has to be added onto the passwords for encryption. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure self-password reset so that users can go in and reset their passwords themselves and have the hashes enabled. So we're going to go back here. We're going to go to Azure Active Directory. Again, if you needed to find it, you could always type in Azure Active and it'll show up there. And also on the side, as a default, it'll be here. So we're going to click in the center. It's going to bring up our actual directory. And what we're looking for is we're looking for on the blade, middle blade under Manage, password reset. So we're going to click here. And if it's off, you really click it to all, or if you have certain groups that you want it added to, you can have, groups, but we have it created on all, and you literally click save, and that's it. It saves, it activates, and so what we're going to do is we are going to create a test user so that you could actually see what these users see when they set up password reset. So we got test. Yep, and auto-generate. Let's copy this password so we have it. All right, we're not going to add it to anything crazy. We just want one created. All right, so we have our user created. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up an incognito window. That's not where I want to go, ladies and gentlemen. Where I want to go is I want to go to myapps.microsoft.com. I want to put in that new user. Get that password. So let's go ahead and just change it real quick, get that done. So we updated the password, but now we need to turn on password reset. So we go to the profile right here, set up self-password reset. And then as you see here, it's authentication. So you can set up the phone, and then you also set up email. And what happens is you go through, you set it up, click a country code, put in your number, and it's just like anything else. Next, email, set up. So you'll set up the email, you set up the phone, you either get a phone call to verify or you get an SMS. Email, same thing, you get an email with a code and you'll put it in. And then once they're done, that's it. And then they'll be able to set up their passwords and reset them on the fly. Now, since we already have the self-password reset set up, and we already had it configured for this client, what happened is since we had it where they had to set up their password and reset it initially, that actually is going to add the password hashes. What this will do is this will allow the encryption to take place on the cloud-only accounts and keep them protected in the cloud space. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to do a 24-hour pause, let the virtualdba.com domain services catch up with the password hashes. I just like to give the entire setup of doing the password resets and everything with a fresh new domain. I like to give it 24 hours. I have ran into issues in the past by trying to rush it, waiting an hour or two, sometimes just didn't cut it. I have had conversations with Microsoft regarding this. They're doing everything they can to resolve it. But for now, initial setup of domain services and any existing users that have been set up outside of the domain services will take 24 hours for the password hash. So just keep that in mind. However, any users that are added from that point going forward, you'll be fine. All right, so moving on, as we can see, we now have our Azure ADDS instance set up. Just to let you know, I did time this one, even though this is pre-recorded, and it took 1 hour and 25 minutes from start to finish. So again, it is automated, but it does take some time. It does do its Azure magic on the back end. But now that it's created, and I haven't touched it since it actually got started, let's take a look together and see what actually is going on. So if we look at the actual instance here, as we can see, it's got our domain. We can see it's got a service health check. As you can see, it's got a green check showing running. So let's just take a look here. So backups, it has not been backed up yet. I will put links at the end of this tutorial here covering Azure ADDS, and it'll show you backup frequencies depending on the type of SKU that you go with, whether it's standard or enterprise and so forth. You do get different backup frequencies. You do get multi-force functioning, things like that at a cost. It hasn't backed up yet. Again, it just finished, so I wouldn't expect it to. However, it is synchronizing with Azure AD. It has synchronized, as you can see, of this date. But let's take a look at the overview. So as you can see, we went to the service health, and it brought us over here. Azure Domain Services SKU, you can actually go in here and change. So let's say you start out with standard. standard you realize doesn't work for you, you need to go through and actually you realize you need to upgrade to enterprise. You can go in here, upgrade, hit save. This will take approximately 30 to 45 minutes. So just keep that in mind. If there's anything that you need to do regarding this service, just do it prior to and then update and go about your business. We're going to discard because we're not going to update that. So we're going back to overview. So you can see as I'm going through these, it's actually bringing me to the other blade over here, and it's actually just, we're going through it. So one of the things that is required immediately after setup, well, I wouldn't say immediately, this is just immediately if you want to start using your domain services. You want to update DNS server settings for your VNet. So keep in mind, any virtual networks that you create within the Azure space is going to automatically use Azure DNS for its services. So if you want to use domain services, whether you have a server with the DC services already on it, or if you're using this service, you need to configure the VNet to make sure that it's pointing to the DNS service for the domain. So as you can see here, it's telling us that the IP addresses of our domain is within the VNet. And then we're just going to hit configure. And it's just going to go ahead and do it. It's going to save it. While it's doing that, let's see here. Yep. So as you can see, it's done. It's letting me know now the DNS servers for this environment are now customized to the IP address of the DNS IP addresses that Azure ADDS gave us. So if you want, we'll go through. As you can see, this is the activity log. The activity log you can access from anywhere with any blade within any resource. It's going to tell you what's happened. We'll get into that another time. Access control, as I said at the beginning in the PowerPoint, this is where you can start assigning roles to users to start having access to this resource. You would do it within here. Properties is just showing you the overview of the services that are provided through the resource. As you can see, it's all the stuff that we looked at on the when we created it. The only thing that's new here is the DNS servers. These are IP addresses that it's using. As you can see, secure LDAP is disabled. So we just showing the synchronization is all and the resource group. So as you can see, it gives you a breakdown of what actually is involved with propagating this service. Secure LDAP, this is where you can enable it. If you enable it, go through, you have your certificates, all that good stuff, and you can start using it for other services. Synchronization, so you can see there's really not much here. So as you can see, your current domain service instance is configured with synchronization of all users. As you can see, again, if you do from all to scope or scope to all, you need to delete and recreate. So it's just going to reiterate that for you. Again, this is the health check. This is where if you would have gotten the overview. Notification settings, it's where you can, again, you can set up the alerts. Again, SKU. Diag settings, this is where you can go in and create diagnostic settings for your environment. You can get into that by just learning more by clicking here. Won't get into that today, we're just kind of keep it simple. It's where you can set up your analytic logs, your workbooks, and then just like every other blade, your troubleshooting and support requests. So this is the user interface of the Azure ADDS. What I did want to show you real quick is what actually was built. So we're going to go to the actual resource group itself, and this is what was built. So it created a load balancer. Load balancer is so it could reach the public space. This is for security. So it did create a load balancer. As you can see, it has its own NAT rules. I'm not going to get into that. I just wanted to show you what actually happens when you automate it. So as you can see, it's got a public IP address that was made, 2 network interfaces, the network security group, which is your rules, your port rules, your VNet, and then the domain server. So just want to show you briefly of what actually happened after you created the service. This is what it actually built. It did build actual virtual resources for the domain services. All right. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pause right here. I'm going to make some magic happen. I'm going to create a virtual machine. I'm going to join it to the domain. I'm just going to show you guys group policy, and then we'll recap. All right. So here's our test VM to view group policy management. As you can see, it's labeled test VM, and it's joined to the domain that we created in the Azure ADDS instance. So what we're going to do is we're going to open group policy management. I've already loaded the feature into the server. So as you can see, it looks just like it would in a regular Active Directory environment, except for it has very specific labels to let you know it's the Azure Active Directory Domain Services. As you can see, they also have some default GPOs. I did check. We'll just look at them together. They are not they're not filled in with anything. They just have. I know it doesn't want to work. Stand by. Here we go. Okay. So as you can see, it's got generic. It's just as if you were to create your own new one and start from scratch. So this just has nothing in it. It's just giving you an example of that it can have policies within it. Excuse me. So one of the things I want to mention is it does have static OUs. You're not going to add multiple OUs. The way your OUs in this case are going to be your security groups. So you could take the security groups in Azure AD and use them as OUs if you choose to. But in this case, it's going to be static OUs. And these here, not too sure what they are. Microsoft really hasn't gotten into what these appear to be. They just pre-filled here inside of the group policy with the Azure Domain Services. So these are the main ones you want to focus on. So default forest policy, and then your regular, your computers, your users. You even have domain controllers. So this is just a brief overview that just to show you can still get to access the group policy feature within Azure Active Directory Domain Services without actually spinning up a server for like a DC.
All right, and we're back. Frank, thank you so much for that demo. Is there any follow-up info you want to give before we jump into Q&A?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So just keep in mind, that, as I said at the beginning, that this is a webinar, a complete series based on Azure Virtual Desktop Instances. So when we actually put this on demand, the PowerPoint presentation that you heard me mention, that slide deck will actually be a part of it. This was just a demo today just to show you the concept of Azure Active Directory Domain Services and what it can do for you in your enterprise environment, save you some money, give you less hardware to maintain, and let Azure do it for you. I just wanted to bring that up as a side note that the slide deck that I did mention to set the fundamental foundation of what everything is in the on-demand. So we hope you guys subscribe to that. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Frank. And it looks like we have gotten a few questions come in. So I think I'll start off and ask the first one to both of you. So our first question here, it says, so my business is growing. Will it be difficult to grow Azure, or do they make that doable?
So I can start if you want, Karen, or you want to take
Sure.
that one?
No,
all right. So just to roll back on what we spoke about, and one of the benefits of Azure is scalability. So one of the things is worried about the technology roadmap of how to get your solution to the cloud or wherever you're trying to get your infrastructure set up. One of the benefits of Azure is you could scale up or scale down on the fly. So to answer your question now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of technical questions that are going to come out of this. I'm sure there's a lot of open-ended questions that we may need to talk about. And just keep in mind that our contact information is going to be at the end of this. And me and Karen would love to sit down with you and your company and have a conversation about what we can do to bring you guys forward into the Azure space.
And just to touch on that also, I think this is a great opportunity, that scalability, and that can we grow with Azure? Is this even good for our business? The retail sphere uses Azure specifically for that reason, because there are times when, in holidays especially, when they have peak seasons, they don't want to invest in that infrastructure. And Frank, you can speak to this also, but to work on that, if with Azure, they can grow up and down even by the season, not even just like the 5-year marks of my company is naturally growing because we're a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And to piggyback more off of what you said, Karen, cost is a lot that drives a lot of business, and then quality of service as well. So Microsoft has done a great job to merge those two together. And I did want to bring up, you mentioned earlier the Microsoft Go partnership. I want everybody to keep in mind with Microsoft Go partnership, when you join up with a company like XTIVIA to manage your environments, not only do you get the expertise of the XTIVIans that are here and you get the backing of every engineer that is here. But you also get Microsoft at your fingertips whenever you need. The Gold Partnership support that we provide also gives us front of the line access to Microsoft experts if there's a need. Let's face it, as sysadmins, any engineers that have been out there, there's just sometimes where you need to reach out to the vendors because you've exhausted everything. Well, the good news about XTIVIA is we have the backing of Microsoft at our fingertips whenever it's needed. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Excellent. Karen, would you like to take the next question and address that to Frank?
Frank, what is an OU?
Yeah, so I mentioned that a lot, and I failed to mention what that was. So if you're a system administrator, you're aware of the term OU. For those that aren't, OU is actually an organizational unit. Organizational unit is basically dealing with the Active Directory domain services. On the back end, you have what's called Active Directory system objects or Active Directory objects. Those are your users, your computers, your servers, even your security groups for permissions. What an organizational unit is, it's a place for, in short, it's a place where to house those objects within your environment.
Great. And would you be able to help, like, so if a company comes with questions and they're like, hey, I've got these different users and I've got these different, I can see you can get licenses for users or these groups, like, can you help me navigate what that looks like? I'm sure you'd be able to help address that kind of a question too.
Yeah, so, we would love to sit down and have a conversation with any client that has these questions regarding Microsoft licensing, Office 365 licensing. We would love to sit down with you, see what your roadmap looks like now, tailor it to your best needs and help you move forward with that. Absolutely.
It looks like those are all the questions we got today. We have both Karen and Frank's contact info on the screen now. As they mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any further questions.
Well, we do just want to, say again, if you're already in the Azure space and you have any questions or concerns, or even if you're looking to expand on your current Azure space, again, Azure has that flexibility. You have the experts here. We'd love to sit down with you and have that conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Karen. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.